Somebody's sitting in a room saying, this is all there is, this is all that's happening, this is the entirety, no other time, no other place, then that's exactly what the mind will say. Well, you're posing the question in one way, another mind might pose it about time. For example, like, well, you know, excuse me, I know I came here today. There was an earlier today when I got in a car and drove here, or got on a bicycle and cycled here, and I have a memory of that. And so, but what about that? It's unanswerable. This is the problem. It's partly because what's being communicated here, and what's communicated by other people, is a description of something which is, I'm going to say, which is apprehended. I'm not going to say which is understood, because understood is too mental. It's just something which, you know, when the sense of self drops, it's like there's an aha, and then it's just seen that the description that's being given here, this is all there is. All there is what's happening. So, but then the mind will, of course, come in and say, but what about yesterday when I have a memory of having met my mother? Or what about Tony or Andres or Jim, who are all giving talks about non-duality in some other place or some other time or something like that? How do you explain that? I mean, this is what the mind will say, because the mind's always looking for explanations. And the problem is, you know, this can't be squared in that way, because this is a description of what's seen. And if the mind wants to argue with it, it will argue with it. And what I sometimes say is, when you get an argument between the mind and non-duality, the mind will always win, because the mind's got all the arguments. All non-duality has is, you get the point. In a way, non-duality is mute, in a way, because everything that we say about this is an error. As soon as we put what we're trying to say here into words, we make an error. So that's all that can be said. You know, if the mind wants to argue with this, it will win. It will argue and it will win. And meantime, this is just this, and this is all there is, and this is the entirety. And questions, in a way, have no, questions like that, they're very sensible, they're very obvious, but they have no purchase here. And I'll just mention this, there's a kind of common phenomenon that happens. I've noticed it, others that give talks that I've spoken to, I think have also noticed it, that if somebody sort of comes to non-duality talks and investigates non-duality, as it were, with their mind kind of regularly, what often happens is that, to start with, there are lots of questions. It's natural for the mind to come up with lots and lots and lots of questions. And then with time, sometimes, not always, but sometimes these questions gradually die away, and the mind just gets quieter and quieter and quieter. And it's the reason the questions die away is often, it's not because they're answered. I mean, if a question's answered, then we let it go, as it were, but it's not because the questions are answered, it's because the mind gradually begins to recognise that the questions are never going to be answered. The kind of questions that the mind comes up with can never be answered. It is a kind of like, almost a kind of continual destruction of the mind. I'm just going to use an image here. I mean, it'll either make sense or it won't. But it's like the mind is trying, I mean, the mind sort of, in a way, sees everything as a task to be accomplished. So here we have the task of understanding. I must accomplish the task of understanding non-duality. So I'd use the metaphor, it's a bit like climbing a mountain. The mind thinks, okay, there is a mountain here to be climbed, and when I stand on the top of it, I will understand non-duality and the task will be accomplished. So the way you climb a mountain is you stand at the bottom and you knock a peg into the mountain face, and then you use that peg to haul yourself up. You're a little bit high and you knock another one in and so forth. Just, I'm not a mountaineer, just humour me on this, go along with the metaphor even if it makes no sense. So what happens with non-duality is that you hammer the peg into the mountain, you grasp hold of it and start to pull yourself up, and the peg just falls out and you just fall back down onto the bottom again. That's what happens to the mind. So the mind is continually challenged and defeated by this in a way. And with some minds, not with all, some minds are very stubborn and very obstinate, but a lot of minds, after they've spent maybe 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years hammering pegs into the rock face to try to haul themselves up the mountain of understanding non-duality, after doing that for some time and continually, the peg just comes out and you just fall back on the ground. After a while, some minds give up. They recognise that these questions will not be answered and cannot be answered in a way that will satisfy the mind. And then sometimes the mind gives up. And it's not, I'm not saying that's a good thing or that it's better. It's not better to sit here without questions than it is to sit here with questions. It's neither better nor worse, but it is sometimes more relaxing. So when the mind starts to give up these questions because it recognises they won't be answered, then sometimes that's just simply more relaxing. Now, does that have any importance? No, absolutely not. You know, is it better to be more relaxed than to not be more relaxed? No, of course not. It's no better. But simply as a matter of description, non-duality cannot be described. Seeing this cannot be described. You know, what is known as a kind of very imprecise shorthand as awakening and liberation cannot be described, absolutely cannot be described. But if we were to give a description, which would of course be totally inaccurate, the best description we could give, well, would be, well, at least it's a little bit relaxing. In other words, relaxation. I mean, describing what we're talking about here as relaxation doesn't even begin to get it, but it's better than any other description. And there's a quote I like to throw in quite often when this comes up. There's an English Buddhist who said, relaxation, he's a Buddhist, so he puts it in this way. He said, relaxation is the key to Buddhahood right here, right now. I mean, that's kind of quite a strong way of putting it, and I'm not saying I totally agree with that, but it's as good as it gets. As a metaphor, it's as good as it gets. So relaxation is as close to what we're talking about as we can get. You know, it's a million miles away. It's the other side of the universe from what we're talking about, but it's still a better description than anything else. So if the mind starts to give up because it recognises that these very sensible and appropriate questions are never going to be answered in a way that can satisfy the mind, well, if it does give up, then at least that might be a little bit relaxing. And that's not better and it's not worse, but nevertheless it's kind of in a sort of imaginative way, it's kind of closer to what we're talking about here. So I can't answer you. Tony, Andreas, Jim, I can't answer you. Nobody can answer you. Nobody can give an answer that is philosophically satisfying. And yet I have the nerve to come all the way from England and sit here in this room and say, this is it. This is all there is. This is the totality. There doesn't need to be anything else. Everything's apparently happening of its own accord. Something's always happening, except in dreamless sleep. In dreamless sleep, there's nothing happening. For all the rest of apparent time, something is happening, and sometimes we think we're doing that, or we think we're causing that to happen, and that's just another thought. It's just another feeling. It has no more significance than Dorothea putting on a sock. Nothing has any more and nothing has any less significance than anything else. Everything is always eternally exactly what it is and nothing else. I'll just add something to what I was saying there. One of the reasons these questions like that and many others are important to the mind is because to the mind it matters what we believe. That's important, and it's important in lots and lots of the stories. I mean, for example, it's important in all of the religious stories. I mean, in some of them it's more important than others, but in all of them it is important. You know, what we believe is important, and having the right belief is important, and not having the wrong belief is important. And that has no importance whatsoever here. I mean, it's absolutely, totally unimportant what we believe. I mean, for a start, I'm not going to say there are no right beliefs and there are no wrong beliefs. I mean, some beliefs we could say are more in error than others, but I mean, in the kind of broader sense, if we're talking about stories of meaning and purpose, you know, my life has a meaning and purpose and it is going somewhere, particularly if that's seen in a kind of religious or metaphysical or spiritual sense, there's probably some belief around that. And it's absolutely unimportant, it doesn't matter. You know, beliefs don't help here, beliefs don't hinder here. It doesn't matter. Agreement doesn't matter here. You know, I mean, when we're talking about the stories of meaning that we hold dear to us, agreement and disagreement is very important. I mean, agreement and disagreement is so important that quite often we're quite happy to kill people because they disagree with us about what kind of God we should worship, or even if we worship the same God, you know, people are quite happy sometimes to kill each other over a disagreement about what precise way we ought to worship that God. So belief can be extremely important to the person. But once the person's seen through, belief has no importance whatsoever. Belief's just another thing that's happening. It comes, it goes. Nothing lasts for very long, not even a belief. A belief comes up. It's there for a few seconds or a minute or two, and then it's replaced by a desire for a cup of tea. And then maybe it comes up again, who knows? But beliefs have no importance at all here. And so it's another way in which this is a kind of an insult to the mind. Because this is, you know, non-duality is a sort of insult to the mind. For the mind, beliefs can be, and often are, extremely precious. Extremely precious. You know, the mind might make me sacrifice my life for one of my beliefs. Whereas here, they don't count for anything. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what beliefs we have. Liberation may still be seen, or it may not be seen. There are no wrong beliefs, there are no right beliefs, but let's pretend for a moment that there are for the purposes of argument. So somebody could have the, whatever this would mean, I have no idea, somebody could have the most wrong beliefs it's possible to have, and still liberation might be seen in the flash, Or somebody could have the most correct beliefs. I have no idea what that could mean either, but, you know, there you go for the moment. Somebody could have the most correct beliefs possible, whatever that means, and yet liberation may be eternally elusive. It's one of the things that can be so frustrating for the mind about this, that what we're talking about here has nothing to do with anything that I think that I am as a person. It doesn't have to do with how I think, it doesn't have to do with what I believe, it doesn't have to do with how I feel. It doesn't have to do with what I practice or don't practice. This has nothing to do with anything the mind thinks that I am. This is to do with seeing through everything that I think I am.